I'm gonna label them so we can put them back in the same place that they were. Oh, modern Chevrolet valves, modern keepers. Okay, here's a valve that wasn't sealing very good. You can see it right there. But for the most part, the valves look pretty good. I'll check a couple and see how the valve guide is. So I'm going to take a gander at the seats, and I can tell you this one on the exhaust valve wasn't sealing off. You can see it's shiny all around except for right in here. It was leaking by. Intake looks pretty good. That exhaust looks good, wasn't leaking. Intake's good. This exhaust wasn't making a real good seal here. So chances are, well, again, this just depends on what you want to do, but the valve guides stems do show a little wear. Oh, and that one's broke out. I can't check it that way. That doesn't feel too bad. They probably all are going to pop, so the guy could reuse these valves. I would. Here, this one's the same way. It wasn't sealing through here, and the rest of the place it was. So probably just a quick lap, and the guy could reuse those. I'm going to take it upside down, pull the cam out, get the lifters out of it. Yeah, you're going to be a little stubborn, huh? All right. Let's just give it a gentle little persuasion back here. See if we get her broke loose. Yeah, she's coming out now. Okay, looks like we got a fairly, probably was a new, I'm going to say that's a Stipe cam. Yep. And it's a 250. Want to make sure that we don't have excessive thrust on the cam bearing, so the cam bearing's probably usable again. The cams seem to turn freely, so I wouldn't be a bit scared of using that. We got a bronze gear on the front of it, and it doesn't show any signs of wear, so I think we could go back in there with that. And now I want to get these lifters out. I'm going to check them as I go. Okay, this lifter's got way too much play in it. They are a 3-wrench lifter, but that one is quite sloppy. That one's okay. That one's okay. That one's all right. That one's okay. That one's good. And that one's good. It's just this back one, the exhaust on number 4, it's a little loose. It's probably not loose enough that, again, low mileage driving, probably go ahead and just rerun these. If I was building a car to go a long ways, I'd probably just go up to the next size lifter. And he's got that so mashed up. Oh, there we go. So you can see where the front one, second one, and the third one, by the time you get back to the fourth, it's up high enough out of the way. But you have to flatten this down in order for the bolt, the nut actually, on the rod to keep it from hitting that tube. If you don't do that, put it all together and turn the engine over, it's going to go clickety, clickety, clickety. And it's no fun going back and fixing it. We need to get out a bore gauge, and we're just going to check to see if our cylinders are round and if there's any taper in them. So let's get us a bore gauge and get that done. Bore gauge, there are a lot more sophisticated. So at any rate, I'm going to drop down to the bottom of my bore where the piston really doesn't, where the ring travel isn't, and I've zeroed out my gauge. And I'm just going to come up here and read through several points. So that's a little less than a 1/2 thousandth. And again, maybe a 1/2 thou. And up here at the top, about a 1/2 thou. So there's a little bit of taper, not much. Well, actually not taper, it's actually just ring wear. And we'll drop back down here in the bottom and make sure, okay, we're still 0. We'll come up here, 0. About a 1/2 thou. About a thou. Oop. Up here at the top. So we've got about a 1/1000 taper this way. And I think in the book it tells you, I don't remember what those numbers were, but at a 1/1000 taper, I wouldn't be too concerned if I was just going to re-ring it and get on down the road. I'd put a fresh set of rings in it, hone it, and get on down the road. This one doesn't have any wear to speak of. Let's get back down here. There's a little difference here in the bore. Okay, we're 0. No wear to speak of. And I'd say that actually was about a 1/2 thousand smaller than the rest of them. So the block looks to me like a guy could just probably drop a hone down through it and knock the glaze off of it. And if everything else was equal and good, just hone it, put a fresh set of rings in it. There's no grooves, galls in it, no pits. It's a pretty decent looking block. And here's something I'll show you if you want to look at it. This right here, when they bored it, they had some pits right down in here. And this is in the ring travel. And you'll notice that those are still in there. And this old car ran pretty good. And I've seen that on a number of times. What was this, 60 over pistons in it? I don't know. We'll look and see what size pistons it are, but you know, to clean that up, it would have took the next size piston. And maybe they elected not to go out to that kind of bore. We need to, I don't remember what the bore is on it, but we'll look. There's a few pits right in there. That's the only one. Again, we put 30 some odd thousand miles on this. I have a friend of mine that we blew up a rod on a tour, and it blew up to the point where the wrist pin got in and galled it, the cylinder wall. I went home, picked up another rod. We got her in and ran that engine for another 15, 20,000 miles with a big groove in it. It really didn't smoke much oil, and you know, so Model T is pretty forgiving. Anyhow, that block you could just go ahead and re-ring and get on down the road. This is the only thing that I see that's wrong with it, and it's kind of hard to argue with 30,000 miles. It performed well, and it's got these 3 or 4 pits over here, so I'd run it again. All right, let's recap where we are, what we found. We found that we have Kevlar bands. They really aren't in too bad a shape, but I don't like how this is not round the way it should be. And that can be a contributing factor to wearing a little thinner, different. It could be a contributing factor to this dragging. But I believe that this drag is because of the transmission drum. But could you reuse these? Well, yeah, probably could, especially if you aren't doing a high mileage car. But we're going to change them out mainly because we don't like the shape. And I don't like doing it this way, but they should be more like that, not all sprung out. So we'll take those bands off and straighten that up. That band that's black was what was running on our low-speed drum. And you can see our low-speed drum is discolored. So the band definitely had been dragging on it, not to the point that it cracked anything. There's no cracks in it, but we talked about how thin this drum is compared to another Ford drum, much thicker. With this being thinned down, it required the low-speed band to be clamped down tighter on the drum in order for it to seize the drum so we'd go into low pedal without it slipping constantly. So this drum we would replace with a better one. Perhaps this was a better one. Our reverse drum, we liked it. It was a new drum. It's got a great gear. Transmission bushings are a little loose and everything. We'd replace them. We remember our triple gears. They're loose. Either this bearing was extremely undersized or this is wore out. When we get new bearings, they should press in with some resistance. If they don't press in, then we're going to go look for better triple gears. Looking at the teeth on these triple gears, this one is well worn. You look at both sides of the gears and you can see quite a bit of difference in it. So chances are I would replace this set of triple gears with better. Could you run them? Yes, you can. But in my opinion, I'd try to replace with better. We had found a Watts clutch in it that doesn't show any signs of wear. It has slipped a little bit, but Watts clutches do slip a little bit. We picked that up on our dyno, but you'd never notice it driving down the road, but it's just a little bit of a slip. These, I would go ahead, I wouldn't have a problem running them. One thing that we didn't do, we've got our flywheel off. We talked about the magnets don't have a very good charge. We also discovered that we didn't have a very good tolerance on the air gap. We were in excess of 40. Nothing was closer than 25, but we were in excess of 40. So when we go back together, we would make a better attempt at getting that to 30. Is a nice number to shoot for. The magnets would have to be recharged. You can recharge these magnets by taking them apart, take the flywheel apart and recharge each individual magnet. That's a good way to do it, probably the better way. Another way to do it is to just simply take a field coil and put it on there and flash it, just like you would charge it and make an attempt in the car. But the flood sheet field coil now is going to be making contacts with the poles, and you zap it 4 or 5 times with 36 volts. You're going to have to get a crowbar to pull it apart, and it would charge that away. It's got a decent ring gear on it. If all of the magnets' heights were in the same and we didn't find any broke spools, guy might just flash it, take the field coil and flash it, 36 volts, hit it about 3 or 4 times. Make sure that you line up your norths and your south and you charge it back the same way, but that could be done. We do have a triple gear pin that got really, really tight and seized. I don't know if that's a problem, but it's heated, so I'd probably change it out. But I want to measure the OD, 795, and we're 795. So if all of these triple gear pins checked out the same way, I would go ahead and just reuse those triple gear pins. Might change that one, might not. It's just got a little blue, got a little heat. Probably didn't change the hardness of it. We liked our cam. We like the fit of the bearing. There's very little, couple of thousandths worth of thrust clearance, which is what you should have there. And I can't get any movement. We'd pop them apart and just take, after we clean everything up and just make sure. But I'd say those cam bearings are in good shape. My good friend Fred Houston said he never found a cam bearing he didn't like, so there might be something to that. It's got a good bronze gear on it, and the cam nut on it isn't wore down to the point where you couldn't reuse it. Remember, most of us use a modern seal up on the front plate for that. That one would work out real good. A bit more on our main shaft. We know that we had a lot of run out on it, but we have a lot of wear on the bearing surfaces, and we know that that is worn down quite a bit. I would find a better main shaft, one that at least had smooth, because this is rough. If this went in there with new bearings, that might be a reason why those things opened up so bad, if the guy didn't change that out. But I would find a better main shaft or replace it with a new main shaft, which the new main shafts are pretty nice quality. Our rods we said we're in trouble with because they're all cracked. I'm not going to get that off of there easy. But we found that all the rods are cracked up here on the rod end, while the caps look fairly good. The discoloration I don't really care for. Like I said, if it wasn't cracked, I would probably pop a shim or two out of these things and maybe take a little time saver, because if I take a Babbitt knife, I don't have to remove much, and that black disappears, which could be, I don't know, carbon out of the oil, just something. But if it wasn't for these being broke, might be able to use them. The pistons weren't scuffing too bad. Quite a bit of discoloration, but I think that's just from oil. The wrist pins felt good. I can't see, I don't see a mark where it tells me what size those were, but for no more than what a set of pistons cost, seeing as how we're going to replace the rods, you could get by with using these, put a set of rings on it, clean them up, decarbonize them, put a set of rings on it, make sure that the wrist pins fit, change out the rods, and put these pistons back in the bores that they came out of. So that kind of gets us with the internal pieces that we found. The mains all seemed Same thing, got that discoloration in it. If I was going to reuse the crank, I might pop a shim or two out. The crankshaft has been is a modified Model A that's been shortened, and the weld that was done on the flange is really, while it looks good, they just didn't clean it up much, which caused us some problems on trying to back the bolts out. I'll bring that crankshaft up here and just kind of show you what I'm talking about. So a Model A crankshaft is about 5/8 of an inch longer, and it originally had about where the flange is where it had an oil slinger, and then it extended back and the flange was on there. So the flange was out here. To put a Model A crank in a Model T block, you need to either shorten the crankshaft or relocate the pan. So if you shorten the crankshaft, they generally cut the flange off. There's a lot of talk, different ways that guys do it, but generally they're just cut off and then machined out, pressed back in place, and then welded up. And in this case, they weld it back, but you can see all this weld that's way out here. Well, those bolts that hold this, there was no smooth surface for them to clinch down on, and so they just galled it in here and really made it a pain to get that off. You know, I don't know the reason why they just didn't come in here when they machined this off. Why didn't they just come in here and touch off another 25, 30 thousandths on that weld out here on the edge, and then it wouldn't have been a problem getting the nuts and getting the bolts in. So kind of brings us back to where we started. We had a round drive plate hole that we've had a square plug go in, or square shaft go in, and we lost this. It self-destructed. Here is the Warford, and this should have been a square shaft, and you can see where it's wore off here. It does have a little bit of a softening on that. It's not a complete square. It does have a little bit of a relief on it, just like the universal on U-joint of your Model T. Looks identical to it, but we succeeded in completely rounding off, and some edges are more so than the other, completely rounding it out, and that in turn chewed out here. So why did that happen? Don't really know. Have a theory, and it's my theory. And if you don't like my theory, you don't like my theory. But I think we found a case where the main shaft mounted on the engine had 6 thousandths or so run out at the bottom, and had 6 thousandths worth of cock opposite where the high side of the runout was. So this thing was 6 over at the bottom and 6 cocked. So we're wheeling this thing around at 1500 RPM right to here. And then we've got the transmission that extends this much up, another 5 inches. So that cock amount becomes a larger number when we get up here to the top. I'm sorry, we don't have the 4th main that was in here. We've looked for it. We don't know what we did with it. But the 4th main was a Babbitt 4th main, and it fits, that's the location that it would go. And the 4th main has a lay of Babbitt in it, which this one does have some. But the one that we took out, the Babbitt was completely gone. It was metal to metal. No Babbitt running on here. So our thoughts are, because we had all this excess cock and run out on it, maybe we wiped out the Babbitt first. we have a stationary fixed mount because this is bolted onto the transmission, oil pan, and hogshead. This doesn't move, it's stationary. So now, with the Babbitt wiped out, with the run out, we're now pivoting or wearing on this surface here. And this just kept wearing away and away and eroding away and eroding away to where it finally lost whatever 4 shoulders it had left, and it just spun out on us. We think this is all due to misalignment of the transmission caused this problem. This transmission will need a new input shaft on it. Obviously, we're not going to use the drive plate. The brake drum's okay. But care has to be taken when you're putting one of these together that it's all in alignment. If we would have not had a Lang's, a KC Warford in here and would have had a U-joint, probably still would have wiped out all the bearings, Babbitt and stuff. But because the U-joint could flop around and move and do its thing, it may not have rounded that out. And I would also add that this engine transmission combination out of Bill's car also had an accessory mount for the transmission to help. Some people think that it's too much weight on the back end of the pan, and maybe I'm just saying it did have it. I don't think that the pan's that bent. We are going to check the pan. That's what we're going to close with, is look at the oil pan just real quick and get a feel for where it's at. But I believe that our problem started with being so far out of alignment and so much cock in it. We're wheeling this thing around, not on a center line, and it wiped out the Babbitt in our main cap. And that point, the only thing that was keeping things kind of halfway together was this square hole on that square shaft, which ended up being a round hole on a square shaft, and that doesn't work. It occurred to us that we really didn't measure this. This is the one that we have, what was it, 85 thousandths run out, and we made a square hole into a round hole into a square, or square hole into a round hole, and lots of miles on it, don't get us wrong. But one of the things that we didn't look at was what's the condition of this flange, because if this flange isn't parallel to the center line of the crankshaft, in other words, if it's cocked off, that's part of that 85 thousandths out around that we had out here at the end of the transmission. And we had that at the transmission, didn't we? 85. So we hadn't really checked this crank. We hadn't looked at it. So just for wiggles and giggles here this morning, let's take a quick look and just see what condition this crankshaft's in. So I wouldn't expect any run out there. Let's see what we got for our center main. Okay, that center main has got, looks like about 1.5 thou. 1.25 thou, maybe. It's a little bit out. And our rear main is 0. So, and I would expect that. So in the process of modifying a Model A crank to fit in, they removed the flange, and on a Model A there's an oil slinger, and so this roughly is 5/8 of an inch further out than where it is today. And they either cut it off, there's a lot of different techniques,
cut it off. Some people thread them on, some people press them on, but it's welded back in place. And this is the flange that was no doubt on the Model A. It wasn't a new piece. So there's a couple of things we'd like to know about that flange. One, and this is going to be kind of a rough reading because this isn't the smoothest OD on the flange, but maybe we can get some sense of what that is. And let's find a place where so that flange, I'm reading anything up to about 12 thousandths, but it's a rough read. I mean, it's not a smooth part, but here is a 0. And there's a jumps from 5 to 10, 5 to 10, 5 to 12. A little less than 5 to 7, and then I get back to 0. Okay. So there's a good chance that that was not put on centerwise. So let's read here. So let's see what I get here. Well, there's 5. And then I come back the other way. There's about 6 thousandths worth of cock on this thing. In other words, center line of the crank is this away, and this is an over-exaggeration, but that's how that flange is on there. That would contribute to more cock. I mean, if we really truly, it's a rough surface, and so let's say we have 5 thousandths. Well, if we have 5 thousandths cock on this plate, and our transmission out to the 4th main is about 10 inches, something like that. So you take that 5 thousandths off and move it out here 10 inches. That gets to be a pretty big number. So this probably was some contributing factor to the event that led to us having to go back into that engine.
So let's take a look at the oil pan in closing, and we'll pretty well have this one done. Okay, I've put the pan on our pan jig just to see where we're at, and she's all bent up. I've got a little bit of work that would have to be done to straighten this one up. It's sitting pretty good here. I can slide underneath it up through here real good. Gets back to square. It's pretty square there. Square there. Got a little loose there. So a little bit of work has to be done. I'm going to tell you that this pan is not that much different than the 50 or 60 other pans that I've ever done. This had a KC Warford on it, and it's bent no different than what I would expect out of any old engine that I come across. I have a sneaking hunch, though, this pan was never straightened when it was put on that car, because it's got a little work to do. But I don't think it's bent or twisted because of the KC Warford, especially with the fact that Bill had a bracket on the back end of it to help support it. So pan is bent. They all are. Trust me, they all are. Every pan you'll come across has got a little bit of a tweak in it somewhere. Very rarely will you find one that you can pick up and put on an engine. It'll be an accident if you do. So hope you enjoyed it. We kind of talked about, we had a problem. We don't know if we really isolated the problem, figured it out, but the theory kind of fits the facts. That's our opinion. Your mileage may differ like everything Model T, but kind of gave you a feel for what we check and look for to determine what we're going to replace or repair or get on down the road with. So I hope you gained something out of it. Got any questions or concerns, give us a shout.